In the heavy afternoon air of Midtown, bustling city life paused with bated breath as a public spectacle unfolded. Miriam Johnson found herself at the epicenter of a societal rift, standing on the administrative plaza steps where she had innocently ventured out for a midday meal. She'd felt the sharp tug of eyes long before the physical assault began, a precursor shared too often among those who breath challenged to systemic oppression by simply existing. The officers, arrogant in their assumed authority, encircled her like predators that had sniffed out vulnerability dressed falsely as strength. Without warrant, without pretext, they shredded the fabric of her summer dress, a scarlet ribbon now swirling heavily around her feet, marking her inescapably. Cameras clicked and phones recorded, modern technology's way of testifying truths otherwise dismissed. The indignities went beyond exposed skin. It stripped away layers of assumed safety and privacy, leaving her raw, an unwilling emblem of resistance. Gasps from onlookers morphed into cries, morphing into outrage. Downtown engines rumbled, the city itself seeming to groan in implications of what had just occurred. From a nearby cafe, people spilled out, their varied hues painting scenes of witness, some documenting with trembling hands, others shouting with indignant rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" a man shouted at the officers, his words a bullet piercing the suffocating air. His voice bounced off glass and concrete, echoing society's long-standing confrontation with everyday abuses of power. Miriam, dignified even in despair, pulled the tattered dress up around her shoulders, refusing to wane under the oppressive weight of judgment. Adrenaline and disbelief battled within her. She could feel the thudding of humiliation and the gathering storm that comes when human rights are laid bare in public displays of hierarchical dominance. Her eyes remained steadfast, an unwavering rebuke to their misplaced sense of supremacy, silently declaring, "You will not break me." The officers, now staggered amidst a cacophony of protests, chuckled nervously. Underneath their forced bravado festered the realization that this would not wash away unnoticed. Their whispers were lost in the burgeoning tide of public condemnation. Bystanders morphed into activists, their voices swelling with command. "We saw everything! You can't hide this!" Another defiant voice rang out. Miriam caught the intensity of solidarity, an invisible hand lifting her from the brink of despair to transform the personal violation into a collective ambition for justice. Through the screen of her tears, which refused to fall, Miriam took in the scene. The blurred lines between ally and adversary. Strangers, now brethren, united under shared humanity, forged in the simmering fires of intolerance. Yet, beyond the immediate, she acknowledged with clarity the arrival of this moment meant her story would ripple through time, weaving into a greater narrative of resistance and refusal to succumb. Eyes met across the street, and she noticed the mayor's somber face through his office window, a moment caught between sympathy and self-preservation, caught between the lives he governed and the office he maintained. Within that shared gaze, an unspoken understanding emerged. Her life had fractured, but not broken. From this day forth, power dynamics would be challenged, authority held accountable. This tableau of injustice, witnessed and recorded, promised repercussions beyond this moment's shame. And so, amidst chaos and shock, Miriam could feel the seed of resolve unfurl, a resolve poised to bridge indignity with formidable strength, poised to echo her plight into a chorus demanding systemic change. To those who stood at her side, recording and shouting, and those hidden in offices and alleys who sensed the historic pull, stand witness, hold strong. In a world poised too often against them, this was only the beginning. A pulse quickened, a heartbeat synchronized, carrying the spirit of rebellion forward, as Miriam gathered dignity from her pain, ready to turn despair into revolution. As the crowd began to disperse, the murmurs and heated discussions of what they had just witnessed lingered in the thick summer air like a storm waiting to break. The footage had already begun its viral journey, leaving a trail of outrage and solidarity across the digital landscape. Phones buzzed and pinged with notifications of sharing, words like injustice, racism, and police brutality threading through the community's consciousness. The city was alive with a furious energy, one that pulsed through every street and alley, igniting fires of resistance in hearts that had long grown weary from repeated ignitions. Miriam, now sheltered in the close confines of her friend Lydia's apartment, felt the weight of the day settle heavily on her shoulders. The world outside was chaos, and yet the quiet of these four walls offered neither refuge nor relief. Cups of untouched tea sat cooling on the table, forgotten in the wake of shared horror and reluctant anticipation of what was yet to come. Lydia had been one of the first to rush to Miriam's side at the plaza, her cries of support cutting through the confusion like a beacon. Now, she stared intently at her friend, eyes filled with an aching compassion that sought to sow fractures even as they cracked wider. "They're calling it a robbery," Lydia finally said, the words laced with disbelief and anger. "They just want to tarnish your image, say you resisted arrest to justify what they did." Miriam's laughter was bitter, a sharp bark in the otherwise subdued room. "Resisted? I didn't resist anything but this damned narrative they're hell-bent on creating," she replied, the fight in her voice trembling at the edges. Lydia placed a hand over Miriam's, grounding them both in the solidity of friendship, an unspoken promise resting in the warmth of their joined hands. "What those bastards did today? It's not just about you. It's about all of us who walk down streets with our hearts in our throats, constantly looking over shoulders. But Miriam," she paused, waiting for her friend's eyes to meet hers, "we're stronger together. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." Miriam already knew this. Somewhere deep within, her resolve was a phoenix in rise, but the shadows of doubt loomed large. She wanted change, demanded it even, but the stark truth of slandered voices and stolen narratives felt overwhelming. Her gaze drifted to the window, where early evening sun filtered through, too bright, too ordinary against the turmoil of her mind. "The lawyers want a meeting," Lydia continued, voice a grounding tether once more. "They think we have a real shot at quelling this nonsense and turning it against them, holding the entire precinct to account." "And the press?" Miriam asked, her voice low yet determined. She knew the power of media, both as ally and adversary. Hungry, voraciously so. "They'll do anything for another bite of this story," Lydia replied, disdain mingling with the hope. "What they don't grasp is they're unleashing more than just news stories. They're fueling movements." In the hush that followed, Miriam rose and moved to the window, looking out at the world with new eyes, eyes that had been forced open against their will. She saw people walking, oblivious to her turmoil, yet unified by the air they shared. She stood there, reflecting on the quicksilver shift from being an individual to becoming a symbol, an unexpected leader of reluctant circumstances. "This is how we fight them," Miriam declared, determination hardening into steel. "They may have stripped me bare, but they've opened themselves up to scrutiny. Every shameful word, every twisted piece of evidence. The world will see it all." Lydia joined her at the window, their silhouettes etched against the fading light, conspiratorial and unyielding. Together they stood, losing patience for waiting and striving for a justice that seemed as elusive as it was necessary. Miriam, now not just a figure searching for personal retribution, but as a symbol of hope, of strength, would carry this not as a burden, but as a banner. And the world outside bled into twilight, a city gripped by anticipation, unaware, but soon to realize that change was already creeping under its doors, whispering insistent demands for justice that would no longer be ignored. The law office echoed with the murmured intensity of focused discussion, hushed yet teeming with purpose. Miriam sat with her back straight, determination radiating from her like a pulse, while her legal team huddled around a table cluttered with documents, laptops, and steaming cups of coffee. The air was thick with the sharp scent of paper and ink, punctuated by the low hum of the air conditioner fighting against the oppressive summer heat outside. This was not just a meeting, it was the beginning of a calculated, relentless pursuit for justice. "We're filing a lawsuit for assault, battery, and defamation of character," announced Sheila, the head lawyer leading the case. Her voice was a steady rock in an ocean of chaos. Sheila had the presence of a battle-hardened general, her approach clinical and strategic, seasoned by years of confronting the seemingly unyielding structures of oppression. The footage from the plaza is damning, but it's the narratives we craft and the pressure we maintain that will turn this tide. Miriam nodded, absorbing the unwavering resolve in Sheila's expression. A woman leading a charge she'd launched countless times before, always with mixed outcomes but never with flinched commitment. "How do you plan to counter their claims?" Miriam inquired, her voice steady despite the nervous energy vibrating through her. Sheila exchanged a look with Nicole, the associate attorney, who handled the next layer of details with deft precision. "We've gathered eyewitnesses prepared to testify to the unprovoked nature of the attack. The narrative shifts depending on public perception and media portrayal, which is why Miriam's story needs to remain front and center. We leverage not just legal avenues, but social ones too." "And the police department's robbery story?" Miriam asked, incredulity lacing her words. The brazenness of their false narrative grated, yet she was all too aware of its potential strength if left unchallenged. Sheila leaned forward, hands clasped tight but reassuring. "Desperation speaks louder than logic. It's a flailing attempt at damage control. By framing the conversation around who Miriam is, her integrity, her contributions to this community, we force them into defensive positions." Miriam exhaled deeply, the pressure of representation pressing down upon her like an invisible hand. Yet, with that pressure came support from her team, a collective rising tide behind her, ready to breach the dam built on systemic indifference. "What's the timeline?" Miriam asked. She needed every detail, every weapon they could harness in this war against entrenched bias. "Filing by tomorrow," Nicole interjected. "From there, pressure builds. Discovery will upturn every dark corner they've tried to hide in. Stalling will be their game. Persistence must be ours." As discussions flowed with a practiced rhythm of planning and anticipation, a palpable shift occurred in Miriam. She felt her fears tethered and transformed. A galvanizing anger transmuted into relentless purpose. There were countless others like her, voices drowned in a system that rendered them invisible, and potential subdued by stereotypes. But wrapped in the charged vigor of this room, Miriam understood that her battle was part of a sprawling tapestry of resistance anointed by too many lives prepared for justice. In the ensuing silence, Sheila offered a poignant reminder. This isn't just your story or ours. It's a reflection of a system failing countless marginalized communities daily. A win here reverberates, sets precedent. Systematic change starts with powerful individuals fighting back. Miriam met her gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This moment, born of trauma, had transcended personal injustice to touch the collective consciousness, fighting against systemic bias. The determination in the room moved like a current, knitting individuals into a formidable unity, ready to face whatever the coming days would bring. As the meeting wrapped, confidence and urgency melded into a single trajectory, determined to spearhead through bureaucratic resistance. They had marshaled their forces, fired the first salvo of this legislative battle, their purpose crystallized by the clear injustice that remained indelibly branded into Miriam's world. Now, out from the shadows of that cramped meeting space, the reality of the justice they sought loomed. Yet for the first time, the impossible seemed possible, not as a whisper in the dark, but as a roar. They, alongside Miriam, demanded to be heard, their echoes poised to dismantle walls thought impenetrable. In the labyrinthine corridors of City Hall, the tension was palpable, an almost tangible presence lurking in the dimly lit corners, where power brokers exchanged hushed words and furtive glances. Mayor Stephen Hughes stood at the epicenter of this maelstrom, caught between the allegiance to forces that had propelled his political ascent and the moral obligation to address the brewing storm with the integrity that his position demanded. His office, Usually a bustling hub of calculated decision-making, now hummed with a frantic energy. Aides rushed in and out, clutching reports, suggesting strategies, all futile attempts at stemming the rising tide of public outrage that had been unleashed in the aftermath of the incident on the plaza. The footage, raw and unfiltered, had carved an indelible mark across the city's consciousness, eliciting a response so visceral that silence was no longer an option. "Mayor Hughes, we've got the police commissioner on line 2, his aide, Lorraine, informed him, her voice a tightly controlled mask barely concealing the urgency beneath. Stephen glanced at his desk, strewn with papers and memos, each one a bearer of bad news. He picked up the receiver with a heavy sigh, the weight of expectation pressing upon him like an "Commissioner?" he greeted, keeping his tone neutral, guarded. "Stephen, this is becoming a PR nightmare," Commissioner Evans intoned, his voice carrying the edge of a man used to maintaining control, but now grappling with the shifting sands of public opinion. "We've had protests outside precincts every night since it happened. The department's under siege." Stephen considered his response carefully, treading the fine line between conservative reassurance and the progressive demands of the constituency he served. "Bill, the footage speaks for itself. We need to take immediate action or risk being swallowed by our own inaction." There was a pause on the line, the silence crackling with unspoken tension. "What are your thoughts?" Evans finally asked, a subtle concession in a battlefield littered with power dynamics. Stephen's mind raced through the various scenarios that had been tabled, each fraught with repercussions. "We need transparency, a full internal investigation. Independent oversight to ensure accountability," he suggested, bracing himself for the blowback he knew would follow. "That's risky, Stephen. We expose ourselves to scrutiny, lose control over the narrative," the commissioner countered, his voice hardening with the defensive posture of an entrenched establishment. "The narrative's already out of our hands, Bill. We need to get ahead of it. Demonstrate that we're committed to real change. This isn't just about damage control. It's about restoring trust," Stephen argued, his conviction deepening with every word. As the discussion continued, Stephen felt the enormity of the predicament eclipsing the confines of his office, a stain threatening to spread beyond, to consume a world too complacent in its optimism. The strain was evident when the call ended, leaving him alone with the thick silence of his office, a silence that bore witness to the tumult of a city at crossroads. He sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair as the political costs of his decisions unfolded in his mind. The potential fallout was enormous, echoing far beyond the confines of City Hall, rippling through every corner of the city that was bound to his leadership. Lorraine, perceptive and loyal, approached with cautious optimism, interrupting the solitude. "Sir, what will you do?" she asked, her voice an olive branch of unwavering support. Stephen sat back, images of the incident replaying in his mind. A woman stripped of her dignity, a crowd ripping through the blanket of assumed civility. "I can't hide behind closed doors, Lorraine. Not anymore. We call a press conference. I'll address the city, acknowledge the outrage, and lay out our plans for an independent commission." Her eyes widened in surprise, then admiration at his resolve. "Mayor Hughes, that's bold," she said, the words both commendation and caution. "Are you sure?" Stephen nodded, resolved. "The city deserves leaders who stand up, not just when it's easy, but when it counts the most." The enormity of the task ahead buoyed him with a sense of purpose, a conviction that this moment, born of injustice, could become a catalyst for change. In the maze of decisions, one truth stood firm. This was just the beginning. The moral arc, long bending towards justice, needed to be accelerated by those willing to stand firm in its path, guiding it, wielding its power towards a future where equity and humanity met not at intersections of atrocity, but in an ever-present reality shaped by understanding and resolve. And Stephen Hughes, caught in this seismic shift, knew that his next steps would define not only him, but the legacy of an entire administration, confronting the sins of the past. The hum of anticipation crescendoed into a collective roar, as thousands of voices congregated at the heart of the city, setting the air alight with their resolute cries for justice. The protest had grown rapidly, a living, breathing testament to a community fed up with systemic prejudice, swelling to an uncontainable mass of humanity gathered under the watchful eye of a tense line of law enforcement. The plaza, which had been the stage for Miriam's public humiliation, was now reclaimed, transformed into an arena of hope and defiance. Cities together are powerful, one protester yelled into a megaphone, his voice resonating through the megahertz of fervor, each word wrapped around the crowd like chainmail, each heart beating to the battle cry of unity. Today we march not just for Miriam, but for every name, every story unjustly silent. The dynamic energy was contagious, fueling the protest as people from all backgrounds, young and old, from different walks of life, stood shoulder to shoulder, faces painted with conviction, their eyes fierce with determination. Many hoisted signs high, vivid slogans emblazoned against the skyline. "We are not invisible. Justice for Miriam. End police brutality." Miriam stood at the center, shielded by those who believed fiercely in her cause. The reality of becoming a reluctant symbol of resistance was daunting, yet empowering. Her story now belonged to the voices who had amplified it beyond her control, and she understood the formidable weight they carried. Beside her stood Lydia, unfaltering as ever, a sentinel of steadfast resilience. "Remember, Miriam," Lydia whispered, the confidence in her voice a lifeline amid the sea of sound. "Your voice is a beacon. It gives others the strength to stand firm." As the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting a golden hue across the scene, the ground seemed to vibrate with their anger, their anguish, their aspiration. Then came the introduction that prompted a hush. Elder Daniels, a venerable figure with decades of activism carved into the deep lines of his face, stepped up to the microphone perched awkwardly on a makeshift stage. His presence commanded instant respect, an echo from the civil rights movement's past. Elder Daniels' voice, though aged, carried the potency of experience and truth, piercing through the noise with unswerving clarity. "I have walked these roads before," he began, his words a crescendo carrying the weight of history, carried the same burdens, felt the lash of indifference across my back. "But never, never have I seen such unity, such hunger for change in the eyes before me today." His eyes scanned the crowd, landing finally on Miriam, offering a small yet significant nod. Miriam showed us how human dignity needs constant vigilance, how it can be stripped yet rebuilt, stronger than before. This is her story, yes, but above all, it is ours. We must nurture it, expand it, let it burst forth as the change we so desperately need. The crowd responded with a thunderous applause, momentarily drowning out the world beyond the plaza. Tears welled in Miriam's eyes, something fragile and fierce swelling in her chest, an acknowledgement that this journey, though birthed in pain, had unleashed an undeniable power, a truth that demanded justice rather than simply catching fire and burning out. Elder Daniels continued, his voice now a velvet undercurrent. "We will march tonight, undaunted by shadows, unbroken by barriers. This is the start of our journey together, one of accountability, empathy, and irrevocable change. Are you with me?" As cheers erupted, Miriam felt the world transform beneath her, a collective liberation tearing loose from the chains of complacency, moving toward a future molded by fearless advocates for equity. From the crowd, someone yelled, "Say your name!" and the wave of voices rose, each echo a promise, a thread in the tapestry of struggle and solidarity. Enthralled and emboldened by the spectacle, Miriam knew her personal quest for justice now surged in the lifeblood of an entire movement. And so they began their march, collectively treading the path toward promise and resolution, weaving strength and defiance into the very fabric of the city. Inside the wood-paneled conference room, the atmosphere was prickly, charged with a tension that only deepened with each justification uttered. The three officers involved in the incident sat rigidly behind a long table, their uniforms starched and pristine, a stark contrast to the murky story they spun to justify their actions. Their faces were iron masks of composure. As an internal affairs panel hastily assembled in response to the growing public outrage, watched through eyes narrowed in skepticism. Officer Terry was first, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics, yet hollow with practiced recitations. The situation began as a standard case of questioning. We had suspicions of theft-related activities, and when approached, Miss Johnson was uncooperative. A murmur rippled through the panel, whispered disbelief punctuating the sterile air. A woman on the panel, Inspector Regina Phillips, frowned deeply, eyes fixed on the pages of her notes as though searching for a missing puzzle piece. "And at what point did the suspicion warrant physical confrontation?" she pressed, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook, each tap a demand for plain truth amid the deception. Officer Terry shifted slightly, a bead of sweat betraying his outward stoicism. She appeared to reach for something in her bag. "We had to act in the interests of public safety." "Public safety?" Inspector Phillips interjected, her voice rising incredulously. "The footage shows no such movements, Terry. What it does show is a blatant disregard for protocol and another human being's dignity. This reaching was nothing more than her adjusting." Across the table, Officer Jamie added hastily, "It was a chaotic situation. Our training, ma'am, emphasized rapid response under uncertainty." Inspector Phillips's gaze bore into him, unimpressed, unwavering. "Training doesn't justify tearing a person's clothing in public, officer. That's not protocol, it's brutality." Silence fell like a shroud. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the veneer of their defense crumbling under the weight of accountability. Their justifications, so confidently recited, now rang hollow in the face of documented evidence and the relentless questioning that chipped away at their feigned innocence. In a bid to regain control, Officer Terry shifted tactics, leaning forward with earnestness designed to manipulate sympathy. "You must understand. Emotions on site were running high. We were doing our job with what we believed was the necessary caution." "Caution?" Inspector Phillips repeated, her voice steady, a quiet storm gathering. "Or was it carelessness, a lack of understanding and respect for the community you are meant to protect?" In their silence, their defeat echoed, reverberating with the heavy truth. What was initially spun as a justified response now fractured, their defensive fortifications dismantled, piece by painstaking piece, by persistent truth-seekers wearing badges of integrity rather than blind allegiance. For the panel, and the city beyond these walls, this moment bore the gravity of moral reassessment. What was on trial was not just the actions of a few, but the systemic acceptance of those actions, an unraveling of a narrative too convenient to remain untarnished, too rotten to remain unchallenged. The room was silent, filled with brittle tension as the panel forewent further questions, letting silence speak volumes. It was a rare moment, one where silence held more power than any shouted claim of innocence. For Inspector Phillips, the path ahead was clear. What mattered now was action, momentum, the vehement pursuit of justice unencumbered by red tape or whispered warnings of political ruin. As the officers were dismissed, rising with the weight of an accountability they could no longer evade, they left behind a room thick with the memory of failed justifications and exposure. The truth, once obscured, now shone brightly, cracking the foundation upon which such impunity stood. The panel rose in turn, Inspector Phillips lingering for a moment, her thoughtful expression captured by the shadow-spliced light that filtered through the blinds. Her thoughts lingered on Miriam, a woman whose plight had become both a haunting reminder and a rallying cry. As she stepped out into the hall, light casting long, resolute shadows, Phillips knew the battle would be long. Uphill, yet it was an essential stand amidst the clamor for change. A moment of clarity amidst chaos, her resolve unwavering against the tide of necessary reform. Back at Miriam's modest apartment, a silence more profound than any words could breach settled like a warm, heavy quilt. The exterior was deceiving in its calm, a stark contrast to the multitudinous thoughts that swirled within. Miriam sat hunched at her small kitchen table, a solitary figure caught in the spotlight of a slowly twirling ceiling fan, the shadows its blades threw adding a rhythmic cadence to her turmoil. She stared at the half-eaten sandwich before her, appetite lost, both heart and mind struggling to digest the recent chaos of her life. All around her, signs of disruption stood blatantly amidst the ordinary. Unopened letters piled high on the counter, once cherished family photos knocked askew along the walls, fragments of her reality now overshadowed by an unwelcome notoriety she could neither ignore nor fully grasp. Lydia watched from across the table, her eyes silently cataloging the subtle shifts of Mariam's presence, the tightened grip on her glass of water, the way her gaze sometimes flickered towards the window, as if expecting to catch her own disapproval staring back at her. Yet there was also the strength that Mariam exuded, a core unyielding, forged in the furnace of her resolve to fight. It offered her friends both solace and inspiration. "Mariam, are you sure you don't want to rest?" Lydia asked, gently breaking the silence, her concern a warm balm against the oppressive nature of their shared uncertainty. Mariam shook her head, mirroring a determination previously fueled by fear, but now cradled by newfound resilience. "I can't rest, Lydia. Not yet. Not when there's this whole world outside spinning on those lies they've told." She dropped her gaze to her hands, scars invisible yet ever present. "Every time I close my eyes, I see all those people, watching, judging, and then there's the supporters." Lydia reached across the table, allowing her lingering touch to become an anchor. "Those supporters are with you, every step. Believe that, okay? You're not alone in this." Mariam nodded, her stony expression softening into something almost fragile, yet intensely determined. She found strength in that touch, in its simple assurance. "I know," she whispered, the admission more to herself than anyone. "I just never thought I'd be here, fighting not just for myself, but for all those voices they want to silence." As the weight of her responsibility settled, Mariam thought of the community rally, of Elder Daniel's words, echoing like a vow in her mind. She knew her journey was no longer hers alone. It was an amalgamation of lives intertwined, with justice deferred. That knowledge, while daunting, was also a sanctuary from the solitude she feared most. Lydia watched her friend carefully, hesitant but hopeful. "You always wanted to make a difference, Mariam. Maybe it didn't come in the way you expected, but this is your chance to do exactly that." Mariam took a deep breath, drawing fortitude from the invisible thread of their bond. "We can't just let it go this time. We've got to hold them accountable, Lydia. We have to ensure that this fight becomes a beacon, not just another frayed thread." Silence met her words, profound and reverent, as if their truth slowly settled into the space they occupied. She had lost much: personal privacy, a semblance of normalcy, but what she gained was a voice amplified by the chorus of injustice she never asked to lead, but now embraced. They sat there until the last light of day bled into a faint twilight. Words were unnecessary as they navigated the landscape of their changed reality. It was a moment of recalibration, a quiet yet unyielding acceptance that their world was decidedly different. Mariam's phone buzzed insistently from where it lay, a seemingly innocuous device, now the tether that binded her to both support and scrutiny. She sighed, stepping back into the torrent. It was a reporter, relentless in their pursuit, as much an ally as they were a curious observer. She glanced at Lydia, who offered a nod of encouragement. Resolved, Mariam answered, her voice a mix of poise and acute awareness as she began what had become almost the ritual of retelling the incident's every painful detail. But now, she did so with an understanding that each word was a step further into the fight she'd become emblematic of, a fight for clarity, for truth, and most importantly, for the right to live in dignity free of fear and prejudice. As the conversation unfolded, Mariam vowed silently to endure, tethered to both past and future, a bridge between painful history and the promise of a brighter dawn. For Mariam, surviving had become an act of resistance all its own. The city seemed to tremble as night fell, a deep, resonant thrum winding its way through streets and alleys, climbing urban facades to perch ominously above. Tensions had escalated, igniting the city like kindling under relentless scrutiny. What began as hushed murmurings under the cover of darkened streets now roared beneath the flickering glow of hastily lit fires, the old grievances breathing once again through provocative flame. In the heart of the unrest, a lit fuse flashed its defiance against an ancient backdrop of systemic injustice. Shadows danced erratically against towering storefronts where grates had been pulled down, signs of businesses uncertain in their solidarity or fear of closing their doors to the unpredictable night. The chaos had a pattern, a rhythm that repeated like generations' worth of struggle recycled into the city's DNA. From her vantage point on Lydia's rooftop, a precarious platform in this grand cinematographic display, Mariam watched the city wear its newest manifestation of discontent. She knew better than to mistake the riot for reckless destruction. Beneath the frenzy was a history of being marginalized, every spark a call for acknowledgement, every taunted flame a cry for renewal. Lydia stood beside her, the both of them wrapped in jackets hastily pulled over their pajamas, watching as their neighborhood transformed beneath the shimmer of collective rage and desperation. It was unscripted, an ode to moments they'd read about, heard about, but never thought they'd bear witness to, yet here they were, reluctant spectators of a story so old there was no identifying clearly where its roots ended and branches began. "Look at 'em," Lydia breathed, not needing to articulate the identity of them. They were everyone and no one, the living embodiment of a shared struggle. It's like watching history unravel in the here and now. Mariam nodded, shoulders tense, remembering outrage, remembering the plaza, the officers, her torn dress, the shocking indelicacy of exposure. The city burned as she had, but unlike her, the city's anger was uncontained by flesh and bone. It was set free to flicker and fade on its own terms. Hearing their cries, Lydia continued, voice deepening with reverberant dread. "It's hard not to feel it here." She thudded her fist gently against her chest. "Their hearts beat as ours too." In the distance, the shimmer of police lights threw an artificial hue into the already electric scene, a reminder that while the march for justice was relentless, the avenues for peace and closure remained fraught with challenges. A line of officers moved through the street like shadowy sentinels, their presence a stark, unyielding contrast to the fluid, passionate voices rising into the night air, a reminder of the structure they fought against, both real and imagined, that held their cries echoing but unheard. Protests and rallies. So much potential, Mariam said, a reflective strength tempering her voice. But until we give form to action, until we chisel out change from these moments, we dance on repeat, Lydia finished, her breath fanned visibly in the cool night air. Look around us, Lydia. Mariam gestured to the extraordinary symphony of noise and fire and fury. These moments are ours. They whisper of promises remade. Lydia turned to her, warmth sparking in her eyes despite the chill of uncertainty that painted the edges. We're building something new, from ashes and dreams and sheer will. They stayed there until the early hours of the morning, etched against the skyline as vigilant witnesses to their neighborhood's passionate plea. They watched buildings stand like monuments against the chaotic ether, caught in the poetic juxtaposition of resilience and vulnerability. And through it all, Mariam felt a new rhythm arriving, layered somewhere beneath it all, the pulse of voices previous generations had never managed to coalesce with such fervor. Dawn brought the anticipated conclusion to the night's fever pitch, a city waking from its own raucous pyrotechnic dream. And as it did, Mariam stepped away from the view, the awareness settling firmly within her. The path was inevitable, built on courage and solidarity, and Mariam, standing at the nucleus of converging truths, was more than ready to light the way. In the hushed, early hours, when shadows glanced off the dim glow of streetlights, a gathering began to form within a basement far away from the prying eyes of the complacent and the forgetful. The room was scarcely larger than a storage unit, yet it brimmed with purpose and fervor. Flickering fluorescent lights revealed faces etched with resolve, their expressions a mosaic of determination, exhaustion, and a glimmer of hope that could not be extinguished by time's relentless march. Miriam sat among them, her presence as much a surprise to her as it was to the eclectic mix of allies who had answered the clandestine call to meet, a call extended across divides that had long existed, separating them into discrete communities just like lines on a map. Within these walls, boundaries melted, dissolving in the face of shared ideals and aspiration. To her right sat Kaleem, a community organizer, his face framed by the curls of his natural hair that moved expressively with every impassioned word. To her left was Angela, a retired schoolteacher turned grassroots activist whose posture radiated restraint underpinned by a steely resolve honed in classrooms and marches alike. "This isn't just about Miriam," Kaleem began, his voice carrying an infectious intensity that wrapped around them like a warm manifesto. "This is about changing the damn dialogue, ripping it from their mouths and making it ours for once. We can't keep letting their narrative lead folks. We're here to listen, to plan, to act." Heads nodded, bodies leaning forward in tacit agreement, the room contracting around their unity, an indomitable spirit poised to wage peace where opposition saw only war. Angela took over, her voice a gentle contrast to the raw energy infused by Kaleem, yet no less powerful. "We need to build bridges between these bouts of anger and sadness and transform them into legacies of change. It's like passing batons in a race we never entered, but have no choice but to run," she said, her words a soft yet insistent drumbeat. Miriam felt her heart swell in time with the rhythm of their exchange. It was this convergence of inspiration and shared resourcefulness that had been missing, an alliance undergirded by diverse perspectives, converging here and now. From the back, a younger voice emerged. Sam, a college student brimming with the idealism of youth and the clarity brought by truth. "It's about systems, yes, but also about stories. We have to amplify narratives that silence can't erode, document every struggle, every victory, create continuity that doesn't rely on this continual cycle of outrage." It was a simple assertion, yet profound in its ingenuousness, a roadmap for cultural evolution rather than merely resistance. "Absolutely," Miriam interjected, finding her own voice in the gathered compendium of perspectives. "And as we do, we cannot forget to lend our strength to those moments where silence threatens to stifle action. Today we collaborate. Tomorrow we execute. We draw upon our relentless commitment and drive this change forward." Their collective determination encased the room, binding them with promise and potential, a potential recognizable in every shared glance and quiet nod of agreement. It was the formation of an alliance, not just in strategy, but in heart. The hours slipped by at an accelerated pace as they discussed strategies honed over untold years of collective experience, allowing a cohesive action plan to emerge from their dialogue. From tactical marches and coordinated messaging campaigns to systems of mutual aid embedded within activism, ideas coalesced into achievable steps, implementations to fuel the fight for narrative control and systemic reformation. Miriam watched them, contributors to a new future entwined with their past, a visionary melange of personalities defying simplistic categorization. In this circle, identities transcended geographical, economic, and ideological barriers, touching the very essence of what it meant to strive for righteousness. Here in this basement, bereft of grandeur yet overflowing with authenticity, they had birthed the beginnings of something seismic, a coalition of the willing, poised to disrupt entrenched biases and disengage automatic prejudices, one unified demonstration after another. As the first glint of morning light bled across the horizon lines, Miriam stepped from the basement into Dawn's embrace, cradled in the knowledge that she was not alone. Together, with hands steady and hearts resolved, they would traverse this uncertain landscape, planting the seeds of justice within every story they wove into the city's sprawling tapestry. Whatever awaited them beyond this beginning, Miriam now knew that their united march demanded acknowledgement, promising a fearsome grace the world could not underestimate nor deny. The arbiter of change walked through the precinct's sterile hallways with a measured pace, each step echoing a declaration of his intention. Lieutenant Charles Hargrove was an anomaly within the system, a man born into the blue, yet one who wore the uniform with a conscience that clashed violently with the traditions he was expected to uphold. His decision to step forward had torn at him, a monumental gamble where silence had been the favored path for those like him who quietly resisted from within. But now, silence was no longer an option. The precinct was its usual flurry of activity. Clerks huddled over paperwork, officers gathered in tense clusters, whispers flowing like electricity through the cables of shared suspicion and uncertainty that snaked through every crevice. Hargrove drew attention as he moved, his presence an unsettling force among the rank and file, a reckoning they had not anticipated. He rounded a corner, catching wary eyes before him. Conversations dipped to uncertain murmurs as he reached the conference room, the designated space for the internal assembly where the turmoil of recent events had churned into a convulsive need for introspection. As he entered, the room hushed instantly, a symphony of shuffling papers and awkward throat clearings that heralded the beginning of something substantive. Officers, some complicit, some conflicted, fixed their eyes on him with expressions ranging from hostility to tentative respect. Among them sat Inspector Regina Phillips, her presence amplifying the gravity of the meeting, lending Hargrove the silent endorsement he sought. "Lieutenant Hargrove, thank you for joining us," she began, her voice a catalyst that dared the room to wake from its complacency. The city, is at a crossroads, as you know well." Hargrove nodded, acknowledging her statement as he stepped forward, placing himself in the spotlight of scrutiny that burned but did not deter. "We've reached a point where the actions we've condoned, through active participation or silent acquiescence, demand accountability beyond self-preservation." He paused, gauging the weight of his words in the silence they drummed into. The officers watched him as though he held the future of their careers in his hands, each one tangled in the precarious web of their collective decisions. The incident with Miss Johnson represents a larger trend, not simply isolated acts of discrimination, but a systemic failure woven into the very fabric of our procedure, Hargrove continued, his voice steadied with emotion held barely in check. He saw Phillips nod slightly, her eyes glinting with an unspoken unity, the acknowledgement that this rare moment of revelation within the precinct could not be squandered. What lay before them was the chance to redefine their roles and allegiance not just in blue, but in the broader spectrum of humanity and justice. "Officer Terry's actions," Hargrove continued, his gaze now piercing and unapologetic, "they speak to a culture of permissiveness that's taken root. We've ignored too many red flags under the guise of maintaining the status quo. That stops now." Gasps mingled with the hum of tension thick enough to draw in every breath the room could hold. His statement was fearless, a clarion call resonating with much more than words. It was a rejection of the inertia that had long cloaked silence in the guise of unity. Inspector Phillips shifted in her chair, steadying the room's rugged dignity with a firm nod. "Lieutenant Hargrove, you suggest a full review? Is that something you're prepared to spearhead?" At her inquiry, a ripple of dissent traveled through the room. Resistance born from fear, from trepidation at what such introspection might uncover, but Hargrove's conviction did not waver. "We must initiate an honest dialogue," he affirmed, his decision threading through a multitude of doubts like a silken thread through a tapestry of unwieldy truth. "Transparency, retraining, a reimagination of our core values. Trust won't be rebuilt overnight, but step one is admitting where we've gone wrong. Silence loomed like an unbroachable chasm, a void thicker than glass, but just as fragile. Every person in that room knew that the lieutenant's challenge, his audacious proposition of institutional reform, would stretch beyond the capacity of spoken platitudes to satisfy. Nonetheless, within the quiet, embers of potential flickered to life. Phillips exchanged a glance with Hargrove, their silent communication one of shared understanding, a way forward through the labyrinth of past mistakes. "Let's set the spark," Phillips said, her voice low but resonant, sweeping across the room as though it were a cleansing wave, taking with it the sediment of complacency. "And ensure it burns longer than it takes to tell a story." With that, Lieutenant Hargrove had crossed the threshold from loyal soldier to harbinger of possibility. His legacy, marred by previous allegiance, now had the potential for redemption, not solely in his name, but in the future of an institution grappling painfully towards realizing the justice it had claimed to protect. The meeting dissipated, but an unspoken vow lingered, a bond among those prepared to claim their role in this evolving narrative. Hargrove, shoulders squared and heart fortified, walked out of the precinct into the bright light of day, determined to make his next move count, to illuminate truth, even when it might blind before it heals. The post-meeting air clung with the humidity of late afternoon, weighed down by the ponderous thoughts swirling in Miriam's mind. Philadelphia streets thrummed with energy, but she felt detached, an island amidst the chaotic sea of human connection that tightened and loosened in pulses she couldn't yet synchronize with. As she wandered aimlessly, she let her feet guide her to a small, secluded park, a few benches under the shade of sprawling oaks that promised sanctuary. Here she paused, allowing the world to ebb and flow around her, granting space to the internal process, transforming her battered soul. She lowered herself onto a weathered bench, running tired fingers along the grain of the wood, the empty expanse beside her both a relief and a daunting void. The city behind her roared with the churning machinations of life, while she searched tentatively for equilibrium in the midst of silent observation. The park was a canvas of hues as vibrant leaves caught the sun's fading light. Miriam let herself be lost in the shifting palette, her thoughts drifting mercurially through the past weeks of turmoil. A part of her felt unmoored, floating in an existence suddenly overwhelmed by shared objectives, not only her own, but the kairos of a community. Amidst her reflection, a shadow fell subtly across the bench, darkening the wood before her. Miriam lifted her gaze, drawn to the familiar silhouette approaching with the ease of long acquaintance. It was Marcus, a longtime friend whose sharp wit had often been her refuge in their shared past. He was a fellow urban dweller who understood without pretension the subtleties of navigating the city's harsh realities. Now he leaned casually against the opposite end of the bench, hands tucked into his pockets, exuding a calm groundedness that was immediately comforting. "Miriam," Marcus greeted, his voice warm but cautious, a thread waiting to be pulled taut only when needed. "I figured I might find you here. Seems like the right spot for thinking." She greeted him with a faint smile, eyes betraying the exhaustion that pondered clarity amidst a life rapidly spinning its story. "It's quieter here," she explained tiredly, trying to reflect the steadiness in him. I don't know what I needed." Marcus nodded, sliding into the space beside her, allowing the bench to creak under their collective weight. "I've seen the news, Miriam. Heard about the protests, the panel meetings, everything." She looked at him, surprised by the keen perception she'd forgotten to expect. "It feels so big, Marcus, like I've stepped into something grand and unmanageable, not just for me, but for everyone." He chuckled quietly, not in derision, but in understanding. "It is big, Miriam, but maybe, that's because it's important, because you opened eyes and thrust light into places it's been sorely missed." Her gaze lowered, the weight of this responsibility settling more gently with each word of encouragement he offered. "Do you think there's a right way, Marcus, to make sense of the chaos?" He shrugged, leaning back as he allowed the question to unfurl in the space between them. "Hell if I know the right answer," he admitted with a wry grin. "But I do know you're part of something vital. All those people out there, the ones who stand and fight, they look to you, and they see someone worth following." Miriam let the words absorb into her, drawing from them a fine filament of courage that tethered her back to herself. "It scares me sometimes," she confessed, voice quiet as the last whisper of summer breeze. "Being seen when I'd rather hide, but then I remember what's at stake, and here I am." He met her stare, eyes filled with a rare, sincere understanding. "And you'll keep being here, Miriam. You don't back down, because that's never been your way." They shared a moment of silence, a pause bounded by trust and unarticulated history, an understanding forged in human communion that needed neither embellishment nor superfluous justification. Miriam exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding, her mind coiling less tightly than before. She threaded her fingers together, casting her gaze upon the surrounding tangle of city and culture in which her role had now widened. "Some step at a time, right?" she mused quietly, the assurance of future action gentle on her lips. Step," Marcus echoed with a nod, voice steady as the branches swaying around them. "We start where we are." Thus anchored in renewed determination, Miriam felt her path solidifying beneath the tendrils of resolve. The work was just beginning, and the courage she'd cultivated would guide her through the maelstrom that swirled insistently around them, beckoning its call for unity and transformation. They both sat there, comfortable in shared silence, as the city began to slip into twilight, a world turbulent yet rich with the promise of what lay beyond their horizons, waiting for them to claim it. In the belly of the police precinct, tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Conversations echoed through sterile corridors as officers gathered in tight, guarded clusters. The air crackled with the unspoken threat of upheaval, a pressure that built with each passing second. It was inside this charged environment that alliances and divisions crystallized, shifting dynamics within as the precinct faced its collective reckoning. Lieutenant Hargrove found himself a reluctant focal point in this storm, the eye through which currents of discontent and hope collided. Despite his usual demeanor, he now moved with an urgency born of responsibility, his presence a catalyst for whispered discussions and subtle, seditious glances. His actions over the past days had laid bare the fertile ground for change, or confrontation, depending on the perspective one held. Inside the precinct's common room, a cacophony of voices vied for dominance as officers debated the implications of Hargrove's proposed reforms: transparent policing, community engagement, a complete overhaul of ingrained methodologies that had long governed their operations. "Can you believe the gall of Hargrove?" Officer Lewis grumbled, holding court among a small group of his colleagues. "It's like the guy's forgotten whose side he's on. We've got to stick together, not throw each other under the bus." His cohort nodded, a murmur of agreement coursing through their ranks, fueling their unease. They saw themselves as defenders of a besieged order, under threat not just from without, but insidiously from within. Adjacent to them, however, a smaller yet equally vocal contingent gathered, individuals spurred by a burgeoning need for accountability and justice. Officer Kim, a quiet figure now imbued with newfound determination, spoke up, her voice cutting through the static of discord. "But isn't it our duty to protect all people, not just the ones who look like us or fit our narrative? If Hargrove can stand up, maybe it's time we rethink everything we've accepted." Her words hung heavily, a splash of cold water against the hardened facades of her peers. A torrent of emotions clashed within them: resentment, guilt, a reluctant curiosity about a reality they had long ignored. "Yeah, but if we start rethinking everything," Officer Torres interjected, "what's left of the unit? Trust matters. Without it, we risk every call, every response, every decision." Officer Kim met his eyes, her own gaze steady. "Without change, what's left of our humanity? We have to ask ourselves whether maintaining the status quo is genuinely worth the reputational and moral cost. The room fell into a pregnant silence, each officer marooned in their contemplation, navigating the treacherous terrain between fear of change and the cost of inaction. The debates raged, lines drawn and redrawn as alliances shifted, fidelity to old regimes facing an unprecedented challenge. In the hallway outside, Hargrove paused, observing through the slightly ajar door the emotional battle within. He saw his colleagues transform, grappling with autonomy and personal ethics under the collective weight of organizational identity. The internal conflict broke through the precinct walls, a microcosm reflecting a larger societal discourse, one of systemic injustices and historical imbalances now forced into the daylight for examination and resolution. It was a volatile intersection of conscience and convention, with nothing less than the soul of the department and its legacy at stake. Back in the common room, the discord looked set to consume them until a shift occurred. A veteran officer, stooped by years of service yet unbowed, cleared his throat. His voice carried the gravel of accumulated wisdom and regret. "We're not perfect, never have been," he began, capturing the room's attention. "This moment, it's on us to better our service. We've got to decide if the shield we wear is a barrier from the world or a bridge to it." And with that, the various factions within the precinct found themselves at a critical juncture. Their words softened, the dialogue that followed marked less by conflict and more by hesitant steps toward a shared understanding. Outside, Hargrove turned away, a faint smile shading his features as he continued down the corridor. The changes were slow, palpable only to those attuned to such subtleties, but they were there, glimmers of reconciliation and mutual purpose in the midst of tempestuous reformation. The precinct was a crucible of transformation, where trials shaped the men and women under its roof, leading them, one heated argument at a time, toward a reckoning of values, veracity towards acceptance, and the potential emergence of a culture rooted in integrity rather than blind allegiance. In this fragile equilibrium, every voice mattered, their collective future painted in hues yet to be blended into the canvas of an evolving definition of justice and duty. The courtroom was a theater of high stakes, an arena where truth and perception grappled for supremacy beneath the scrutiny of an attentive public. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that ebbed and flowed like the tide, sweeping across rows of wooden benches packed with spectators, journalists, activists, and curious onlookers, drawn by the relentless media coverage and the familiar sting of a compelling narrative. Mariam entered the room with her legal team, the weight of countless expectations resting heavily upon her shoulders. Sheila, her seasoned attorney, walked beside her, projecting a calm assurance reminiscent of an old oak weathering a storm. Together, they faced the serpentine path of jurisprudence laid out before them. Opposite sat the defendants, the officers involved in the Plaza incident, flanked by their lawyers, their expressions a stoic mask of resolve masked with apprehension. The tables were set, the players assembled, and in the hallowed chamber of law, the narrative would find its crucible. It was not the first time Mariam witnessed such proceedings, but this time her case had become the flashpoint of systemic injustice, courage, and societal reflection. The stakes transcended her personal plight, imbued with the dreams and struggles of an entire community seeking redress for long-festering grievances. As the judge, a silver-haired woman with discerning eyes that seemed to pierce straight through facades, called the court to order, the room fell silent, every gaze focused on the unfolding drama that promised to shake the status quo. The prosecution began with a straightforward, unembellished narrative, an account of a woman stripped of her dignity in plain view, her rights trampled under the pretense of authority. The opening statements painted a vivid portrait of injustice, wielding words like scalpel blades to precision cut through the defenses of obstruction and denial. Sheila rose, her demeanor composed and authoritative as she laid out the framework for their argument, each point meticulously mapped to dismantle the officer's narrative piece by piece. With articulate clarity, she underscored the systemic biases that marred every step of the enforced protocol leading to the plaza's public humiliation. Miss Johnson was not just a victim of individual misconduct, Sheila emphasized, her voice cutting through the tension like a bell. This case reflects a larger trend, where routine enforcement is tainted by prejudice buried not in evidence, but in perception, shaped by implicit bias and inherent stereotype. The defense wasted no time in retaliating, insisting on the officer's innocence. They wrapped themselves in the language of duty and necessity, casting Miriam's actions as suspicious, her reactions as problematic, a strategy familiar and suffocating in its refusal to confront the root of their collective missteps. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom atmosphere sizzled with an energy almost visible, the air laden with suppressed voices, spring-loaded with rebellion, ready to break the bounds of decorous restraint. Midway through, a key piece of evidence was presented, footage from the plaza, undeniable in its stark depiction of the event. It played on a large screen, the room bathed in its illumination as a pivotal moment in the testimony. Miriam watched, her senses recoiling as her own image flickered across the screen. Vulnerable, exposed, a casualty of systemic derision turned into visual testimony. Yet, where once she'd flinched, she now held firm, meeting every second with an unyielding gaze. It reminded everyone present that the truth, however painful, had a power that exceeded the limitations of silencing and suppression. In this contention was Miriam's unfaltering resolve, a one-woman battalion fortified by the collective struggle that sat quietly among the audience. She caught Lydia's eye. A flash of reassurance passed between them, the learning shared amongst their allied students, grasping the gravity of this vital lesson. The cross-examinations followed, a ballet of exacting questions and evasive answers, each inquiry another strand of fabric woven into an intricate tapestry of the court's narrative. With every question parried, every defensive counter, the truth edged closer to revelation, awaiting its moment to leap into the arena, triumphant. As the session drew to a close for the day, the judge's gavel descended with a definitive crack, sealing the room's cacophony into the silent pillars of tomorrow's anticipations. The departure of each attendant, weary yet expectant, left behind the promise of change, hovering like an unspoken vow above the courtroom. Miriam walked with Sheila and her team, stepping out into the late afternoon sun, the weight of forthcoming tomorrows a constant companion. Yet in that moment, standing on the courthouse steps, she felt undeniably lighter, buoyed by the invisible support of those who had stood for her, dreaming of new beginnings shaped by a truth finally unshackled. Here, at this crossroads of accountability and justice, Miriam's resolve burned, unwavering, ready to face the coming days with a certainty born not just of personal vindication, but of a shared uprising. Her courage, now a beacon amidst the ceaseless rhythm of a march toward transformative change, the courtroom was a theater where truths and lies danced an intricate ballet. But outside, the world spun a narrative of its own, a narrative fueled by murmurings and sensational headlines that spread faster than wildfire. As Miriam stepped back into the world beyond those hallowed doors, she was no longer just a participant in a trial. She was a symbol in a story told on screens and papers across the nation. The media circus spun its loud, colorful web, each outlet clamoring to capture the story's essence with sound bites and dramatic proclamations. It was here, amid this frenetic chaos, that another layer of reality unfolded, twisting Miriam's personal trials into a larger tapestry of systemic injustice. One early morning, as the city wore the shroud of dawn's gentle light, Miriam found herself watching the sunrise paint the urban canvas. Her gaze drifted over buildings that lingered like sentinels above streets still whispering yesterday's stories. She held a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into her palms as she tried to ground herself amidst the swirling storm of public discourse. Her phone buzzed insistently, a lifeline to the world outside, connecting her to the stories framed by those fighting to understand or to manipulate her lived reality. She hesitated before picking it up, the screen alight with notifications that had become a daily assault on her senses. A headline caught her eye: Perception or Reality? The Mariam Johnson Incident and Policing in America. Below it, an article delved into the intricacies of race relations, systemic bias, and the need for reform. The words were sharp, the analysis rigorous, yet they skewed toward sensationalism, a thread weaving hyperbole with fact, framing her experience within a broader narrative that seemed to gain new dimensions with each unfolding event. Scrolling further, Mariam noticed a worrying trend, a counter-narrative rising like a siren call to those unwilling or unable to fathom the uncomfortable truths laid bare by her case. In social media feeds, the acidity of vitriol clashed with pulsations of support, the algorithmic echo chamber amplifying both sides of the divide. It was as if her life had become a battleground for differing realities, each side entrenched, armed with words that could shape or fracture futures. Yet, amid the cacophony, a thread of positive momentum emerged, a groundswell of solidarity among those who refused to let her become a mere caricature in someone else's tale of adversity. "Mariam!" Lydia called from the adjacent room, her voice cutting through the haze of Mariam's musings. The thrum of loyal presence, steadied by friendship, was nourishment in this landscape of uncertainty and broadcast debate. Mariam set down her phone, turning to face Lydia, whose expression mirrored the bond of camaraderie forged in their shared experiences. "I was just reading some of the coverage," Mariam confessed, her voice a mixture of weary resilience and inevitable. Lydia crossed over, sitting beside her, the space between them filled with understanding that didn't need voicing. "I know it's a lot," Lydia said, her fingers sketching comforting patterns across Mariam's back. "But remember, there are countless people out there who see beyond those manipulated narratives. They see you, your strength, and the truth you represent." Miriam nodded, drawing strength from Lydia's words and the broader circle of support that spanned the continent. Voices raised in unison, some familiar, others unknown, all resonating in the same vein of yearning for change. "The media may skew things," Miriam mused, her tone reflective, "but they also give us a platform. If there's a way to channel all of this, to mold it into something constructive." Lydia's nod was fierce and immediate. "Exactly. Turn their amplification into our strength. Let them see that every story they twist connects to a living human being, a community bent on more than survival. We want transformation." The path was fraught with uncertainties, with barriers and opportunities inseparably tangled in the progression of events. Yet the journey ahead felt suddenly less daunting, threaded with potential and pathways yet unnamed. As the morning sun stretched its fingers through the window, casting patterns of light and shadow, Mariam felt the dawn of realization. This was her narrative to shape. It was a story that transcended her personal saga and touched a movement, a reawakening of voices long subdued, determined to rise, undeterred by the forces seeking to silence them. In the unfolding chapters to come, Mariam understood that the fight was not just within the judicial system, not merely a skirmish in the charged ether of public opinion, but a broader, deeper battle, one fought in the heart, in ink and sound and acts of ordinary courage every day. "We'll make sure they understand this isn't just a moment," Mariam said, clarity framing her resolve, "but a movement." Lydia smiled, eyes bright with shared hope for the future. Together they faced forward, preparing to engage the next wave, armed with the truth, buttressed by community, and driven by the inexorable human spirit that refused to dim in the face of adversity. The courtroom was packed once again, the air charged with an undercurrent of expectation. As the final testimonies were set to unfold, the tension was palpable, weaving through the rows of benches where spectators sat in rapt anticipation. Today, the proceedings promised revelations that would either cement the prosecution's case or tilt the scales towards the defense. a defense that had strained credibility with every turn. Miriam entered the court, girded by the presence of those who believed in her, and those who took her struggle as a personal call to arms. The air was heavy with the whispers of history, a melodious chorus of resistance echoing in the faces turned expectantly towards the podium, where Sheila stood poised and ready to present a pivotal witness, a figure who had walked the line between the institution and reform. The doors swung open to admit Lieutenant Charles Hargrove, his appearance triggering a symphony of murmurs that rippled through the room. His entrance was a courageous step into the light, an officer whose conscience had transcended the constraints of the badge, placing justice over indoctrination and truth over silence. Hargrove approached the stand, his demeanor a portrait of resolve tempered by the knowledge of what his testimony could mean, not just for the case, but for the very fabric of the enforcement culture he had sworn to defend. Sheila took her place, all eyes upon her as she began with measured grace, her voice a beacon of clarity. "Lieutenant Hargrove, thank you for coming. Can you tell the court, in your words, the culture and circumstances within the precinct regarding actions taken on the day in question?" Hargrove nodded, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. "The events involving Ms. Johnson highlight systemic issues, the predisposition to perceive threat based on racial bias rather than evidence. It's a culture that skews accountability and emboldens misconduct under the guise of authority." His words were bold, threading the courtroom's anticipation with explosive truth. He spoke of implicit biases unchecked, of trainings that paid lip service to diversity without meaningful change. Each statement was a hammer, cracking the facade, laying bare the pavilion constructed by years of sedimentary silence. As Hargrove unraveled his narrative, Miriam felt her heart pound with each revelation, each admission of vindication of the lived reality that had propelled her into this arena. The courtroom fell silent, absorbing the full weight of his testimony, the air taut with the realization that the fight extended far beyond the individuals seated before them. It was symptomatic of an endemic disorder pervading systems purportedly designed for protection and service. The defense shifted uncomfortably, their composed front retreating beneath the heat of transparency. Attempts to challenge Hargrove's testimony were met with unwavering conviction, his responses clear-cut and unyielding, a manifestation of an integrity reclaimed. The proceedings reached a crescendo as Sheila presented a damning final piece of evidence, internal documents suggesting instances where officers avoided accountability, their actions glossed over or excused. It made for uncomfortable viewing, the weight of such collusion stark against officer duty to protect and serve with impartiality. When the judge dismissed them for the day, the courtroom emptied, each individual carrying the imprint of Hargrove's testimony into the broader world beyond. The hall echoed with fragmented conversations, vibrating with shock, anger, and a collective reckoning that demanded acknowledgement. Outside, the sun blazed defiantly in the sky, infusing the courthouse steps with warmth and light, a stark juxtaposition against the cold, clinical proceedings within. Miriam lingered on those steps alongside Lydia, the two women acutely aware of the day's monumental impact. "Do you think it'll make a real difference?" Lydia asked, the question both hope and apprehension interwoven in a fragile tapestry. Miriam gazed at the crowd dispersing, her voice decisive amidst uncertainty. "It has to, Lydia. Hargrove's courage cracked something wide open today. This isn't just about me. It's a larger push toward dismantling a system long marred by shadows." In that moment, standing at the intersection of history and future possibility, Miriam felt the current of change, a tension between what had been and what was yet necessary to achieve. Across the street, a protester held a sign aloft, words written in bold, defiant strokes. "Justice is a light, not just a hope." The sentiment cradled Miriam's resolve, like an embrace of solidarity, infusing her purpose with indomitable strength. As she turned to Lydia, her voice was confident, woven with the resolve of countless voices who would not be silenced. "We're going to see this through, every step, not just for us, but for everyone who fights in shadows, waiting for their justice to shine. With the courage swelling within her heart, Miriam stepped forward, ready to face the next chapter with a spirit emboldened by truth, a journey far from over, lit with the flames of countless stories that demanded to be told. As the echoes of the courtroom recessed into the background, Miriam found herself craving the familiar embrace of community more urgently than ever. She turned to the modest but vibrant community center that had served as a guardian of neighborhood memory and activism for as long as she could remember. The building wasn't imposing, but it stood firm, its simple brick facade a testament to years of resilience and solidarity. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the electric energy of anticipation and concern. The center was a hub, a beating heart in the urban sprawl drawing people together when nights felt darker than the days had light. Miriam felt her spirit lift as she entered, greeted by a tapestry of familiar faces, neighbors, friends, mentors, all those she had grown with, fought alongside, and aged into a dawning collective consciousness with. Children ran amok beneath the warmth of low-hanging lights, their laughter mingling with the hum of adult conversations, each thread weaving into a communal security blanket. Here, hope was a practical currency, traded in stories, shared experiences, and a mutual understanding forged across generations. Miriam made her way to the circle of chairs that formed the gravitas of the evening, a meeting she'd called herself. There was a nervousness tinged with excitement in her movements. These were her people, her tribe, and today they'd gather not just as witnesses to her story, but as active participants in the expanding dialogue her narrative had energized. As she took her seat, a murmur of greetings embraced her, each voice a tether grounding her amidst the tides of her resolve. Lydia joined her, sitting comfortably at her left, a guardian ally through turmoil and triumph alike. Elder Daniels presided over the group, his presence an ever-comforting shade against the bitterness of social unrest. His eyes, wise and compassionate, met Miriam's with a depth that filled the room like the sound of a much-loved song. "We're glad you joined us, Miriam," he began, his tone warm but potent with undisguised respect. "We've all been waiting to hear where your soul directs our steps next." Miriam nodded, absorbing the weight of expectation with a deep, steadying breath. "Thank you, Elder Daniels, and thank you all," she said, her voice finding resonance in the room's attentive silence. "In the struggle we're engaging, it's become clear that our stories hold the seeds to change." Applause welcomed her words, light and encouraging, lifting the atmosphere from apprehension to a collective drive for the tasks ahead. The meeting unfolded with a seamless continuity from earlier discussions, each speaker contributing not just ideas but pieces of themselves, binding everyone present in a collaborative landscape finely meshed with varied perspectives. Stories flowed, experiences shared raw and ready, the thread of authenticity enlacing their discourse as tightly as the bonds of community. They spoke of adversity, shared the milestones birthed from grief, their voices crafting an audible bridge from the past into the promising shadow of tomorrow. It was amidst these storytelling moments that a new flame sparked. A teenage boy named Jaden stood, his face earnest and gaze unflinching. "We've got to keep telling our stories," he asserted, with a fierce determination that ignited whispers of agreement from the group. "People just listening and understanding isn't enough. We need real things happening." His words hung in the air, drawing nods from voices old and young, interlapping in unison with each agreement to forge ahead with boldness, actions blossoming from consciousness, narratives leading to tangible change. At his urging, the group turned their attention to actionable items, organizing community workshops on rights and resistance, crafting digital campaigns that articulated their stories beyond neighborhood boundaries, creating safe spaces for dialogues to engage both allies and opposition in the same breath. As voices melded into the shared vision, Miriam felt a swell of pride that hummed beneath her skin, a realization that this was more than just her story. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of shared adversity transmuting into forged alliances. By the time the evening drew to a close, the mapping of their future intervention was wielded with clarity, a beacon for mutual activism, a light not just for the path ahead, but for every corner shadowed by doubt or disillusion. As people reluctantly parted, outwardly carrying the weight of responsibilities, but inwardly embraced by hope, Miriam lingered once again, watching the stories of her kin spill vibrantly across the waning twilight canopy. Elder Daniels approached her, his presence warm and reassuring. "You've become more than a voice, Miriam. You're a catalyst. Remember, this movement isn't just for change, it's for life reclaimed." His words were both a blessing and a vow, a solidification of the cause they had committed their hearts to uphold. She took his hand, squeezing the promise back through an unspoken language of affirmations. Stepping out into the night, Miriam was awash in a new dawn of possibility, casting over her soul like the morning sun after a tempestuous night, aware, prepared, unyieldingly ready to amplify voices with her own, writing new chapters into that eternally stretching tale known as hope. In the subterranean quiet of the police precinct, where whispers often carried weightier truths than proclamations, Police Chief Randall Brennan sat alone in his office. The dim light cast a shadow across papers scattered like fallen soldiers on his desk, each one a testament to the turmoil that roared outside these walls and within them. The air was thick with the unspoken, a rapid evolution of civic consciousness crashing against structures long thought unyielding. As Brennan reviewed yet another report highlighting the growing public outcry, he felt the pendulum of accountability swinging inexorably closer. The precinct housed varying shades of loyalty and dissent, a microcosm of a city divided and united by the very struggle it sought to resolve. Here, the internal discourse had turned from murmurs to lively debate, infusing the air with a palpable tension. Brennan knew he stood at a precipice, caught between maintaining control and embracing the sweeping tides of necessary reform. His door creaked open, and Inspector Regina Phillips slipped in, closing it behind her softly, a gesture of respectful discretion that underscored the weight of her presence. "Chief Brennan," she greeted, her voice a low hum amid the office's thick quiet. "I thought you might want an update on the situation." He gestured for her to sit, offering a weary smile that didn't quite reach eyes dulled from carrying the weight of command for years longer than he cared to acknowledge. "Phillips, there's a lot of noise, inside and out. I'd appreciate hearing it straight." Phillips was a stalwart ally in the trenches of reform, her loyalty earned not through rigid adherence to the status quo, but in her pursuit of justice with integrity. She spoke with the clarity of someone accustomed to cutting through noise, painting the situational landscape with strokes of insight rather than embellishment. "You've probably surmised that the tension is mounting," she began, her words carrying the deliberate weight of unvarnished truth. "There's a divide forming, those who push for meaningful changes and those clinging to familiar patterns that no longer serve." Brennan nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of fatigue and contemplation. "Can't say I'm surprised. Change has always come hard." Phillips leaned forward, her gaze steady. "The rallying cry on the streets in the precinct is a call for transparency and accountability, not just in word, but in action. Lieutenant Hargrove's testimony has sent more than ripples. It's breaking through to where we need it to." Brennan considered her words, the meaning laced with implication stretching far beyond bureaucratic platitudes. He exhaled, the weight he bore resonating in the long sigh. "And you think we should move forward with his plan to initiate community partnership programs, revise training manuals, open dialogues with local leaders?" She nodded firmly. "Yes, and more. It's about laying new foundations where trust can actually grow, about not only listening but engaging earnestly. Every step towards transparency chips away at the barriers that have kept us insulated for too long." For a moment, silence reclaimed the space, underscoring the gravity of the decision before them. Brennan knew what was at stake, not only his integrity as a leader, but the morale and future of the institution he had devoted his life to stewarding. "Phyllis, if we cross this Rubicon, there's no going back." he said, voice tinged with the acceptance of a burden more righteous than ruinous. Phillips met his gaze without wavering, her conviction a bridge leading from the precipice into the unknown. Chief, if we don't, reputations may stay intact, but at what cost? The gulf between us and the community will only widen if we don't step forward. Brennan sighed, a sound laced with the release of long brewing wariness. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the quiet resolve that settled over him. He would stand with those who marched toward change, lead, not just with consequence, but with courage. "All right," Brennan said, the words as much a plea for strength as a determined commitment. "Draft the outlines of actionable reforms. Get Hargrove's input. Convene the necessary teams. Let's move forward." Regina Phillips nodded, her pleasure conveyed through the determined energy she exuded, a promise that, together, they would face the brunt of revitalization unapologetically. "We'll make this work, Chief. We'll create something better." As she left the room, Brennan turned to the window, watching the city swell with the rhythms of evening life, a tapestry of pulsing lights and unquiet hopes stretching far beyond the glass. Here, within the precinct's confines, seeds of change had taken hold, roots venturing into new soil nurtured by courage and collaboration. Randall Brennan took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders against the tide of uncertainty. Despite the storm gathering outside, he felt a profound sense of purpose, a commitment to act as a steward of reform, guiding his department and the community it served toward a future mapped by transparency, dedication, and renewed belief. As night enveloped the precinct, he settled into his chair, contemplating the path just begun, a quest defined by vision and integrity, driven by the countless narratives that demanded not mere acknowledgement, but genuine embrace. The air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation, the kind that crackled and thudded with every nervous clearing of a throat and the rustle of shifting papers. It was Judgment Day, a moment pregnant with the possibility of redemption or ruin, where the weight of justice hung suspended, awaiting its descent. Mariam sat at the plaintiff's table, her heart a symphony of anxious beats that resonated with the expectant silence encasing the room. Around her, familiar faces gathered. Lydia, Elder Daniels, Kaleem, all present as witnesses to the unfolding testament of her struggle. Each presence was a thread in the intricate tapestry of solidarity that had formed around Mariam, stitching together a wider community yearning for change. The defendants, those officers seated across from her, held a collective expression of stoic resignation. They had presented their defense, clinging to the procedural justifications that had defined their reality, yet the gravity of impending accountability now shadowed their features with an aged weariness. The judge, a woman of clear-eyed resolve, brought the court to order with the crisp rap of her gavel, a signal that the speculative whispers murmuring through the gallery would soon give way to clarity. Her gaze swept the room, authoritative yet fair, embodying the embodiment of the law's sober force. From the bench, the judge began, her voice calm and deliberate. "Today we stand at a crossroad where the actions of individuals intersect with the responsibilities of institutions. Justice seeks not just to address this case, but to establish a precedent that will guide future conduct and conscience." She paused, allowing her words to penetrate the collective consciousness of those assembled. The room held its breath, every soul attuned to the solemnity embedded in the unfolding moment. The evidence presented has revealed a pattern of behavior that, though justified under current policing paradigms, conflicts with the fundamental rights afforded to every citizen under our Constitution. The judge continued, her voice rising with unwavering conviction. "Therefore, this court finds the actions of the defendants in violation of both ethical conduct and statutory obligation." A collective exhale swept through the room, a wave of relief, vindication, and the echoes of hopeful murmurs from the spectators. Mariam felt the tension loosen its grip upon her chest, a warmth blossoming through the corridors of a heart long constrained by uncertainty and doubt. As a result, the judge pronounced, the court orders the defendants to be held accountable through disciplinary actions supervised by an independent commission. Furthermore, the department is mandated to implement comprehensive reformative measures, including biased conduct training, community engagement initiatives, and transparent review procedures. As the verdict rippled across the room, a tempest of emotions animated the space. Some faces lit with unrestrained joy, others frozen in shock, while a few reflected introspective acceptance. For Miriam, the ruling was a tangible victory, a recognition of her struggle and a beacon for the change she had come to symbolize. In the gallery, Lydia met her eyes, her smile radiant with the shared triumph of hope realized. The others flocked closer to Miriam, embraces exchanged wordlessly, the collective energy inside the room a tangible, pulsing testament to the triumph over adversity. The officers, now weighted by the full implications of the court's decision, bore expressions of reluctant acknowledgement. Their defense had faltered against the truth, a truth magnified by testimony and community willpower that refused to dim under institutional pressure. The judge concluded the proceedings with a resonant call for reflection. Let today mark a turning point, a reminder that justice left undone impacts us all. May this verdict pave the way for genuine reconciliation between law enforcement and the communities they serve. As the court adjourned, Miriam stood from behind the table, taking a moment to survey the assembly, a microcosm of a society teetering between accountability and aspiration. Her gaze landed on Kaleem, whose knowing nod conveyed the future yet to be realized, one shaped by collective struggle, resilience, and determined perseverance. Outside, a bright sun greeted them, bathing the steps of the courthouse in a brilliant glow that seemed to speak of transformation yet to come. Miriam emerged into this light, a heroine of circumstance turned leader by necessity, a daughter, friend, and advocate whose moment of crisis had opened dialogue for change. Her supporters and well-wishers gathered, their voices celebrating through the corridors of the city, a city now carrying the mark of her courage, woven into the canvas of civic memory. Miriam knew there was more ahead, a continuum of dialogue, reform, and vigilance. But today, she allowed herself a moment to bask in the victory. With Lydia and others by her side, she descended the steps, leaving behind another chapter in the storied journey of justice, a chapter not of conclusion, but of bold beginnings, carved into the legacy of human dignity reclaimed. In this place, amid the echoes of stories both spoken and silent, Miriam understood she was part of a broader symphony, a community composed of voices rising, demanding not just visibility, but the profound transformation she herself had become an agent of. In the weeks following the verdict, the city began to settle into a tentative peace, the edges of its collective trauma softened by the promise of reform and accountability. Yet, for Miriam, the resolution was bittersweet, a moment of public triumph, tempered by personal reflection on the irrevocable changes that had been wrought in her life. Returning home, she wandered through the familiar corridors of her apartment, each room filled with memories now shaded by the events that had catapulted her into the spotlight. Her living room, once a sanctuary, felt like a witness to whispered conversations and silent vigils held in the darkest hours of uncertainty. The phone calls of congratulations continued to come, well-wishers eager to lend encouragement, but every ring carried a shadow she could not quite dispel, the shadow of what she had lost in the process: privacy, trust, and, in quieter moments, an innocence that once allowed her to traverse the world without the weight of constant vigilance. In the kitchen, she found herself confronted by a collage of newspaper clippings, artfully arranged by Lydia, each headline a reminder of the journey undertaken, the battles fought and won. Justice for Miriam, a city's reckoning, voices of change, they proclaimed alongside images that captured the resilience etched into her expression. Yet despite their bold affirmations, Miriam felt the echoes of those phrases blur at the edges. Each headline was a chapter of a story that extended beyond her, a narrative collective in its scope but intensely personal in its sacrifice. The loss tinged her celebration with somberness. for no victory could fully return what had been taken in those moments of public exposure and violation. She missed the simplicity of anonymity, the ability to walk freely without the stares of recognition or the whispers of strangers theorizing the dimensions of her experience. Lydia found her there, gazing at the cumbersome weight of memory compiled into print. She approached quietly, her presence a balm to the turbulence churned by expectation and endurance. "Mariam, do you regret it?" Lydia asked softly, the question hesitant, yet necessary, cutting through the air with empathetic sincerity. Mariam pondered, her hand tracing the parameters of a clipping where her face stared back, defiant, yet vulnerable. "Regret? No, I don't think that's right," she replied after a pause, her voice a mosaic of contemplation. "I think I mourn what was lost along the way, the person I was before this." Lydia nodded, her gaze tender and understanding. "Change comes with a price, doesn't it? But you haven't lost yourself, Mariam. You've just expanded. You're still you, maybe just a larger version with room to carry this fight." Mariam smiled at that, a quiet respite from the somber reflections that had pooled within. The room felt warmer, more intimate in the shared understanding they held, the solace born from truth laid bare. "Maybe you're right," Mariam conceded, her spirit lightening under Lydia's earnest optimism. "I suppose there are places we venture because life insists we go there, even when we can't see what's next." With that acknowledgement, Mariam allowed herself to lean into the uncertainty of what lay ahead, accepting both its challenges and its potential. She wasn't just continuing from this point, she was transforming, nurturing the seeds of change planted in the soil of her journey, the soil of collective intention, resilience, and unwavering hope. Her losses were real, stitched into the fabric of progress, but they weren't just absences. They were spaces where new understanding, new vision now bloomed. Mariam was more than what she had endured. She was a symbol, yes, but more viscerally she was a woman, defined not by the trials faced, but by the strength cultivated within every step taken. As she turned away from the collage, moving with Lydia towards the comforting glow of their friendship and shared mission, Mariam embraced the wholeness of her evolution. Each chapter of joy and pain, each whisper of doubt and conviction, contributed to the mosaic she continued to craft, a mosaic peopled with others whose voices joined hers in a crescendo that refused to be silenced. Together they stepped forward, hands woven into a promise of companionship and courage, prepared for the uncertainties of tomorrow, a tomorrow molded by today's relentless journey towards a justice that was as personal as it was societal, a goal at once intimate and infinite in its reach. In the weeks that followed the verdict, the city pulsed with a new rhythm, one dictated by an intricate dance between healing and reform. The echoes of protests had quieted, replaced by the hum of collaboration and dialogue as communities engaged in the collective work of rebuilding trust. Amidst this flurry of activity and cautious optimism, Mayor Stephen Hughes found himself at a crossroads that demanded decisive action and unambiguous leadership. Inside his office, sunlight streamed through the expansive windows, casting a glow across the room, a light that highlighted the dust motes drifting leisurely, an odd serenity amidst the turmoil that continued to ripple across his administration. Hughes stood at his desk, reviewing the latest reports and proposals from the Committee on Police Reform, the documents scattered like chess pieces poised for a game potentially transforming the city's future. The glassy surface of his desk reflected a man newly aware of his role as a guiding force, compelled by the moral imperatives unveiled during the events that had unfolded across his tenure. With the city's attention fixed on actionable change, Hughes had resolved to act not just for political survival, but for the legacy he wished to build, a legacy rooted in transparency and justice. The heavy oak door opened, ushering in Lorraine, his chief aide, carrying even more binders filled with proposed legislative actions. Her expression was one of resolute determination, mirrored in her brisk movements as she approached. "We've got the community leaders ready, and the press conference is set for this afternoon," Lorraine informed him, her words brisk but tinged with anticipation. "This is the moment, Mayor. You're about to make history." Hughes nodded, taking a breath to steady the weight of expectation. "I'm ready, Lorraine. It's time we pave a new path forward, one where officials and the community walk side by side in shared purpose." As he prepared to address the city, Hughes felt the gravity of what was about to unfold. They had drafted a sweeping reform proposal, a comprehensive plan outlining key initiatives for training police officers, establishing civilian oversight committees, and fostering community policing programs designed to rebuild trust from the ground up. When the moment finally came, Hughes stood before the podium on the City Hall steps, the assembled press a sea of cameras and microphones ready to capture a potential turning point. Behind him, the grandeur of the building served as a reminder of both his responsibility and the resilience of the city he served. He began speaking, his voice confident yet layered with the sincerity of someone who had come to understand the depth of the city's fractures. "Today marks not just a response to the challenges we've faced, but the foundation of a future built on accountability, empathy, and collaboration," he declared, his words firm, resonating with the authenticity he had chosen to embrace. The reform proposal was unveiled in detail, covering procedures for accountability, measures for training around implicit bias, and establishing forums for ongoing dialogue between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Each point drew from feedback and testimony heard and felt across the city, crafting a blueprint intended to bridge the chasm of distrust and build something sustainable. As he spoke, Hughes occasionally glanced around him, finding allies within the crowd, familiar faces who had championed justice alongside him, their nods of encouragement a tacit endorsement of the endeavor. Among them was Miriam, her presence a reminder of the power of individual courage amidst collective struggle. "For too long, we have allowed division to dictate our interactions. But today, we unite," Hughes continued. "Together, we embark on a path where every voice counts, where every life is valued, and where we write new chapters of unity." There was a pause, pregnant with the significance of what his words carried. The crowd, a multiplicity of voices and backgrounds, stood united in their anticipation of change, a sentiment that translated into spontaneous applause, a wave of collective support that swept through the piazza. Miriam watched, her heart swelling with an emotion that rang through the applause, an acknowledgement that the fight for justice continually evolved, requiring perseverance, patience, and an unyielding spirit. As the press conference concluded, Hughes descended the steps, pausing as he reached Miriam and Lorraine, sharing a moment of solemn gratitude and renewed resolve among them. "Miriam," he said, his voice quieter, laced with sincerity, "your courage has drawn us to this point, and it's people like you who will steer us toward something truly remarkable." Miriam nodded, her strength evident as she met his gaze. "This is a beginning, Mayor. Let's make sure it counts." As they dispersed, each intent on carrying the momentum forward, the atmosphere vibrated with the kind of hope that demanded actions matching aspirations, an ethos that would mark Hughes's administration and the city's evolving narrative. With newfound purpose, Miriam, Lorraine, and Hughes walked away from the piazza, each a steward of the promise, each carrying the torch of transformation toward a horizon only partially glimpsed but brightly awaited. Their journey a shared commitment to elevate a city, onward to a future crafted not just by policies, but by people, resilient and united in their quest for justice and equity. The optimism that had filled the air at the press conference began to weave through the city, merging with conversations in coffee shops, neighborhood parks, and at dinner tables where families gathered to discuss the implications of the changes underway. For Miriam, it marked the start of a new chapter, one where transformation became tangible, both in policy and in her daily life. Stepping into City Hall once more, but now as an appointed advocate for community relations, Miriam felt the weight of her journey settled gently on her shoulders. It was an honor she hadn't foreseen, yet one she embraced with vigor, ready to bridge the gap between citizens and governance through the lens of her experience. The hallways were alive with activity, an amalgam of municipal workers, activists and members of the press bustling through, each propelled by the shared momentum generated from the reforms. Miriam moved purposely through the hubbub, a beacon of focused resolve amidst a sea of earnest determination. Inside the newly established Office of Community Police Liaison, she was greeted by a team that had been assembled under her guidance, a diverse group representing various facets of the city's myriad communities. Each individual brought unique expertise and stories, their collective mission to facilitate dialogue, mediate conflicts, and ensure that promises of reform resonated meaningfully in everyday life. The meeting room buzzed with the energy of collaboration, the air punctuated by the rustling of papers, the click of keyboards, and the vibrant exchanges that signaled the start of their endeavor. Miriam took her place at the head of the table, eyes bright with the fire of purpose. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and determination. "Our role is vital, not just in implementing change, but in embodying the values of trust and accountability throughout this process." Sheila, freshly transitioned from her legal advocacy into a pivotal advisory role, nodded emphatically, her presence a comforting continuity from courtroom battles to governance transformation. Next to her, Kaleem leaned forward, his organizational acumen ready to guide grassroots engagement. "We stand at the precipice of lasting change," Kaleem concurred, his voice carrying the melody of optimism. "Our efforts must focus on listening initiatives and cultural dialogues that appreciate the richness and diversity of our neighborhoods." The room absorbed his clarity, every team member intent on nurturing the nascent relationship between citizens and law enforcement. Their strategies included town hall meetings, collaborative projects, and cultural exchange programs, all mechanisms to dismantle barriers of mistrust and build a cohesive community narrative. As discussions unfurled, Miriam listened intently, her own ideas interwoven with the conversations around her. The blend of strategic planning and heartfelt commitment was inspiring, a testament to the collective dedication that had grown from individual struggles into a formidable force for good. In many ways, the next steps will depend on our ability to humanize the influencers of change, the officers, the residents, the leaders. Sheila added, her approach methodical yet personable. "We're scripting a narrative that everyone is part of, whether they realize it or not." Miriam nodded, acknowledging the seamless convergence between advocacy and reality, the passage between intention and action symbolized by their gathering. "Let's make sure no one feels left behind," she asserted, determination etched into every syllable. "We are shaping new norms, ones grounded in empathy, equity, and unyielding justice." As their meeting drew to a close, a sense of accomplishments unfurling swept through the room, encasing Miriam in a halo of supportive accolades, her work an extension of the many voices that had echoed hers through the chambers of determination and hope. Stepping out into the street beneath a canopy of twilight, Miriam felt the pulse of the city, a living current carrying with it the inspiration of countless aspiring hearts. She paused at the intersection, observing the familiar crisscross of humanity, each person part of the intricate web of the city's essence. In this urban expanse, an oasis of potential and transformation, Miriam took a moment to savor the harmony between her past trials and this promising odyssey. Her journey had led her to the cusp of systemic reform, cradled in the camaraderie of empathetic allies and visionary lungs, pushing forward the breath of progress. As she resumed her walk, Miriam understood that forging ahead meant more than maintaining momentum. It meant embodying the very values they sought to endorse: love, courage, and justice, while extending her arms and inviting each story into the expanding fabric of unity. Reaching the park where she and Lydia had once paused to ponder the unknown, Miriam now felt a distinct resonance, an understanding of roles yet unwritten, intersecting lives now animated by shared purpose. The world was not perfect, but the collective tide was rising, surfacing hope and resolve from beneath waves of once stagnant seas. Together, they would usher in a new chapter of resilience and renewal, as the city rose to meet the dawn of transformation, with Miriam and her community tracing its luminous edge into the promise of their shared future. The transition into advocacy brought profound changes to Miriam's life, a newfound rhythm woven with community interactions, meetings, and the unyielding resolve to steer the city towards genuine transformation. Yet, even amidst these responsibilities, she found herself carving out moments of quiet, moments where the world slowed down to allow reflection and gratitude for the journey she'd undertaken and those who had walked it with her. It was during one of these interludes, enveloped by the familiar embrace of Lydia's apartment, that curiosity drew her to the window. From there she could see the neighborhood casting off its weariness in the glowing afternoon sun, a symphony of urban life composed of chatter, resilient laughter, and the occasional bark of a distant dog. Lydia joined her, eyes bright as they took in the unfolding scene below. "You made quite an impression at the meeting," Lydia remarked, her tone suffused with quiet admiration. Miriam turned slightly, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Who knew I had a knack for politics?" she quipped, her light-heartedness shading the gravity of purpose that followed her every step. "Not just politics," Lydia countered, looping an arm companionably around Miriam's shoulders. "You've become a force for change, Miriam. Evidence that determination and vision can reshape even the most stubborn structures." Miriam felt the warmth of the compliment settle within her, but it was juxtaposed with the faint ache of memory, of past trials, and the person she once was before the mantle of duty was thrust upon her shoulders. "I never imagined things would take this turn," she admitted, her voice threaded with reminiscent wonder. "But I'm thankful for the chance to make a difference, however small." Lydia nodded, her understanding a salve to the constant pressure Miriam felt. They stood there in a companionable silence, watching as a pair of children raced down the sidewalk, their laughter carrying on the wind, a testament to resilience and hope in the smallest of pleasures. Down the street, a familiar figure caught their attention. Elder Daniels moved with deliberation, his pace unhurried, yet seasoned with the sagacity of years spent fighting quiet battles. His gaze met theirs and he raised a hand in greeting, his presence a continual reminder of the interwoven lives forming the tapestry of their community. Feeling compelled, Miriam and Lydia slipped into shoes and descended to greet him. As they approached, Elder Daniel's smile was like a beacon, casting warmth to those in its proximity. "Ladies," he called, his voice a deep, comforting timbre, "just the ones I wanted to see." As they closed the distance, it was clear his appreciation went beyond the ordinary niceties of conversation. He gestured towards the benches marking the small park nearby, a place that had become a sanctum for those seeking solace and connection in the heart of the city. Seated beneath the dappled shade, Elder Daniels regarded them with paternal fondness, a silent testament to the enduring bonds of a community knitting itself together with every shared experience. "We've watched this city stir, but it's people like you who give it heart," he began, his words measured, a reminder of constant vigilance and growth. Miriam allowed the compliment to settle into her bones, a vital reinforcement as she navigated the unexpected yet welcomed path before her. Her gaze focused on the world around them, vibrant with possibility, teeming with lives that pulsed in syncopation and harmony. "Things are changing," Miriam acknowledged, her tone underpinned by resolve. "It's challenging and exhausting, but I feel more alive in this work than I ever imagined." Elder Daniels nodded, a sage understanding reflected in his eyes. "Change is often born of struggle and sustained by the unwavering spirit of those who don't allow their setbacks to define them. Remember, Miriam, it's the small victories that nourish the soul, even as you strive towards the larger goal." Lydia squeezed Miriam's hand, the gestures of solidarity grounding her in the reality of their shared journey, a journey that brought them together in effort and aspiration, visionaries working toward a common good. They talked for a while longer, voices weaving a quilt of fellowship between them. As shadows began to lengthen, Elder Daniels rose to depart, a promise of future meetings exchanged with grateful acknowledgement. The walk back to Lydia's apartment was full of lightness for Mariam, each step resonating with a sense of intimate empowerment and infinite possibilities. As they crossed the threshold back onto familiar territory, she knew that the road ahead, while fraught with the demands of justice and community healing, was ultimately a path of her choosing, a path aligned with intrinsic truths that spoke to the essence of human dignity. In the gathering nightfall, where twilight painted the cityscape in hues of silent reflection, Mariam felt poised to continue her advocacy, a renewed strength tethered to her heart, unswerving in her commitment to bind the facets of her experience into actionable change. Here, amidst the ambient hum of life continuing its choreographed dance around them, the wonder of potential was tangible. Imbued with the promise of relationships nurtured, a city revitalized, and a soul at ease with its past, while welcoming an open-ended, extraordinary future. The precinct loomed before Mariam like a fortress steeped in history, its stone facade bearing silent witness to countless narratives woven through its halls. Today, she returned, not as a petitioner or adversary, but as an advocate for change, her role redefined by the recent tides of justice and reform. The city had opened its doors to her influence, yet it was here, within the corridors of law enforcement, that the greatest test of her resolve lay. As she approached the entrance, she felt the familiar flutter of apprehension mixed with determination. The precinct represented the linchpin of systemic reform, a bastion poised on the brink of transformative accountability. Today, she would confront those who had once wielded authority against her, continuing the dialogue she had initiated amidst moments of profound upheaval. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the linoleum floors reflecting the fluorescent lights that illuminated the orderly chaos of the precinct's daily routine. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, yet there was a subtle shift discernible in the air, a heightened awareness that had seeped into the building following the public scrutiny it had endured. Mariam was here for a meeting, a scheduled discussion with officers both old and new, intended as a platform for open exchange and collaborative planning. Yet, beneath the formal agenda, a more personal narrative awaited reconciliation, an understanding waiting delicately in the balance. As she made her way through the precinct, familiar faces emerged from the throngs, some nodding in recognition, expressions mingling surprise with respect, surprise with cautious alignment. Among them stood Lieutenant Hargrove, his demeanor composed, yet warm, a cornerstone of advancing change within these walls. "Mariam," he greeted, stepping forward with an outstretched hand that signified more than mere courtesy. It marked a bridge between past actions and future intentions. Taking his hand firmly, Mariam met his gaze with unwavering clarity. "Lieutenant, I'm here to listen, to learn, and to help build something better." He nodded, leading her toward a conference room where others had already gathered. It was a space emblematic of purpose, filled not just with chairs and government-issued furniture, but with the charged anticipation of renewed collaboration. The mix of uniforms and civilian attire converged around the table, an ensemble of stakeholders committed to weaving dialogue into the precinct's evolving ethos. As the meeting commenced, Mariam listened intently, her presence a silent testimony to the complexity of bridging divides. Officers like Terry and Jamie, whose past actions formed fault lines in the community's consciousness, now sat in positions of reflection. Their participation suggested readiness to engage, to delve into lessons hard-won, and to embrace change that required them to dance on edges rarely approached. "We're not here to dwell on the past," Mariam began once it was her turn to speak, her voice firm yet empathetic, "but to figure out how we reshape the narrative going forward. Our aim is to prevent these incidents, not just manage them better, but to make them inconceivable." Her words found resonance in the room, her sincerity a catalyst lighting the potential for collaboration. Across the table, Officer Kim leaned forward, an ally since the trial's revelations. "We need transparency, support, and training that goes beyond procedure to encompass humanity." Kim asserted, her conviction mirrored in the nods of agreement from those assembled. The discussions evolved into a symphony of intentions, strategy interwoven with narratives. The assimilation of experiences exchanged with honesty that had seemed unattainable months prior. Proposals for community engagements, revised protocols, and officer wellness programs took shape, each plan a strand in the tapestry they worked tirelessly to mend. Through it all, Miriam felt the shifting tides of understanding and responsibility drawing her closer to the people who, not long ago, had been adversaries. They too were seeking redefinition, an identity no longer constrained by the boundaries of uniform, but expanded by shared humanity. It was in this layered complexity that Miriam saw the evolution of her journey, a melding of resolution and reconciliation, an intimate acknowledgement of resilience, not just proclaimed, but shared. As the meeting drew to a close, Lieutenant Hargrove addressed the room, his gratitude clear. Today's conversation is the beginning, not the end. It marks our togetherness, a commitment to carrying this torch of clarity and justice forward. As chairs scraped across linoleum and participants rose, Miriam found herself momentarily suspended in time, a lightning bolt of realization anchoring her in place. The journey ahead was immense, the challenges far from over, yet they were poised at the pinnacle of what was possible, ready to carry this breakthrough into the heart of reform. Exiting the precinct, the day greeted her with its customary hustle, the city vibrant and unpredictable, yet home. Miriam walked down the steps much differently than she had months ago, head high, heart steady, ready to embrace the intertwining paths of her advocacy and humanity as they unfolded with each step toward a future she helped to craft. Each door opened and closed with purpose, uniting under an unwavering mission, a community and its protectors committing to travel the road paved with rebuilt trust and unrelenting justice. In their hands, Miriam's dream and their shared reality awaited not just continuation, but flourishing. The evening air was filled with warmth as the community gathered in the open courtyard, a living testament to resilience and rebirth. Strings of lights cast a gentle glow over the animated faces of neighbors and friends who had come out to celebrate progress, to honor the bond forged in the fires of shared struggle and newfound understanding. Laughter spilled like music into the night, blending with the conversational hum that vibrated with both historic echoes and the pulse of a city looking forward. This gathering was more than just a communal event. It was an affirmation of hope and determination, marking one of the many moments to come in their journey toward lasting transformation. Miriam moved through the throng of people, exchanging warm greetings and quiet words, each interaction a thread in the intricate tapestry of community her life had woven. Alongside her walked Lydia, her steadfast companion throughout the upheaval and triumph, their smiles testament to the triumph of friendship and the fulfillment of shared dreams. "Look at all this," Lydia said, her voice carrying a note of awe as they paused at the heart of the gathering, surrounded by tables laden with homemade dishes contributed by all. "It's like we've turned the page together, everyone and no one left behind." Miriam nodded, her heart full. "It's beautiful, isn't it? To see everyone come together like this. It's everything I've hoped we could achieve." Nearby, Elder Daniels shared stories beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak, his words a balm against the uncertainties they had faced. The children gathered around him, eyes bright with wonder, as though the tales he spun painted vibrant colors across the quiet canopy of stars. As Miriam watched, a deep sense of purpose settled within her, grounded in the knowledge that the bridge they had constructed through effort and empathy was steadfast and enduring. It was a legacy unfolding in the laughter that echoed through the night. The unexpected silence marked the approach of Police Chief Brennan, who was greeted not with the apprehensive glances of yesteryear, but with nods of acknowledgement and gestures of partnership. He moved purposefully through the crowd, making his way toward Miriam and Lydia. His expression held a quiet satisfaction blended with the humility of a man who understood the weight of the steps they had taken, orchestrating the balance between reform and duty. "Miriam," Brennan greeted, his tone carrying a warmth that reflected his gratitude. "Tonight is as much the community's victory as it is yours. It's a reminder of what can be accomplished when determination leads the way." She met his gaze, her acknowledgement laced with mutual respect. "We couldn't have come this far without everyone's commitment. Your leadership was a crucial piece in all of this." Lydia added her own nod of agreement. "This is what change looks like, Chief. Each step forward, leaving footprints others can follow." Brennan surveyed the gathering, where groups mingled and voices shared supportive nods. Mothers marveled at the security of their children's futures, and elders recounted victories that had begun with whispers of dreams long deferred. His heart swelled with pride as he realized this transformation was only the genesis, the beginning of countless actions based on commitments nurtured, not coerced. As the evening unfolded, voices rose in gentle unanimity to fill the open courtyard with song, a hymn of change, an anthem of unity. The melody was soft, yet powerful, an invocation of spirit, a chorus promising to guide their journey forward. Miriam found herself swept away by the harmony, by the shared affirmations sung in voices as distinct yet wondrously united as the colors of leaves on autumn trees. She was not just a leader, not merely a figure defined by circumstance, but an emblem shaped by a myriad of lives all intertwined with her own. As the song faded into the quiet rustle of the breeze, Miriam knew the work ahead remained vast and demanding, but the vibrant canvas they created together imbued her with a steadfast resolve. Tonight was a beacon marking their journey, casting light on a path yet traveled, where hope and courage lit the way. Embracing the night with open arms and a hopeful heart, she understood that regardless of challenges, they would face them collectively, each person carrying a piece of their vision toward wholeness. Her spirit uplifted by gratitude and purpose, Miriam walked among her community, a harbinger of tomorrow's promise. In this humble courtyard, under the watchful eyes of friends and the stars above, she felt whole. Every hardship transformed into possibility, every dream a tangible thread within their stolen futures, reclaimed, renewed, and undeterred. The whispered promises made amid the trials had found their voice in song, and together they would resound for years to come. As the night dimmed to embrace the calm tranquility that only a fulfilled day could bring, the echoes of laughter and music began to fade, replaced by whispered conversations and gentle goodbyes. The event had drawn to a close, but the sense of community lingered, floating on the cool night air that drifted through the courtyard like an unseen presence, holding everything together. Miriam stood apart, contemplating the kaleidoscope of faces, the warmth of shared smiles, and the bond now entrenched more deeply than before. It was in this embrace of unity, amid the waning light of celebration, that she allowed herself to truly absorb what had been achieved and what still lay ahead. The crowd dispersed gradually, leaving pockets of intimate gatherings beneath the moonlit canopy. Each departing figure left behind the imprint of their presence, a promise of continuity in the evolving tapestry of reclamation and renewal. Here, at the threshold of possibility, each step away from the courtyard echoed with resolve rather than retreat. As Miriam watched, a hand settled on her shoulder. Lydia, ever present and unwavering, stood beside her. Their shared journey weighed heavily on both, yet with each victory, the burden grew lighter, transformed into collective strength. "You did it, Miriam," Lydia said softly, her voice laced with admiration and kinship. "We've all done it. Tonight was just the beginning." Miriam nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon where tomorrow's light would soon dawn. "This is our new reality, Lydia, woven together by everyone who dared to dream of more." Moments of silence stretched between them as they gathered their thoughts, the brilliance of what they had set in motion taking hold. The quietude surrounding them was not absence, but presence, a harmony of aspirations once thought unattainable, now within reach. "Lydia," Miriam murmured, her words enveloped by the comforting serenity. We've seen dreams rise from ashes. We turned whispers into songs, and together we'll write the next chapters in ways we couldn't have imagined. Lydia smiled, the sentiment reflected in her eyes as she grasped Miriam's hand, a tactile reminder of their unbroken partnership. "Ready for anything," she replied, her voice carrying the conviction that underlined their entire journey. Around them, the world seemed poised for transformation, awaiting their gentle yet unyielding push. In the distance, the city's skyline built a silhouette against a starry backdrop, a testament to resilience, waiting to reflect the luminous character of a community reborn. The city, brought back to life through struggle and solidarity, stood as a monument to the possibilities that awaited those with the courage to seek justice. Each person who had gathered tonight carried that light within them, promising to shepherd it forward through every storm, every triumph waiting to be unveiled. As the last stragglers departed, as echoes of their mission bound them in purpose, Miriam felt the gentle weight of her calling settle comfortably around her heart. This was her place, not as a solitary figure leading an unwieldy march, but as a vital part of something larger, more profound. "You know," Miriam began, almost a whisper against the night, "I used to wonder if anyone truly listened, if stories like mine mattered." "They matter enormously," Lydia affirmed, her grip fortifying, as if to anchor this truth in their shared belief. "We listen, because through your story, we find our own voices too." The moon climbed higher, casting its gentle glow over a city ready to face the morning with renewed vigor and spirit, fed by activism and empathy. The transformation was in their hands, a quilt of resilience, stitched with threads of courage and hope. Turning away from the courtyard's embrace, Miriam and Lydia walked back into a world they had forever altered, one footstep at a time, a world that now knew their strength, their stories, their resolve. This was not just a fade out into quiet, it was a crescendo of spirit, a testament to triumph echoing into tomorrow. As they journeyed onward, Miriam's whispered promise carried through the night, wrapped in the resolve of human potential. Together, we'll rise. As we embrace this new dawn, how will you add your voice to this symphony of change? If you're inspired, like, share, and subscribe to keep the story alive. What part will you play in this ongoing tale of justice?